So I have flown the worst, oldest, most beat up mech scan radar the Eagle has, and it's the best radar I've ever flown with. I was so impressed. I was like, holy cow, check me out.
All players, low down, active, bullseye, 1327, so tactical. Lights on.
Welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Merge Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Benitez. Before we get started, 2 things for care and feeding. First, if you've somehow stumbled upon this podcast without knowing or finding out about the newsletter, go ahead and go fix yourself. The link is in the episode description, www.themerge.co. That's right, it doesn't have an M at the end. I couldn't afford it, so that's all I got. The second thing I want to talk about before we get to today's episode is something I should have covered in the first episode. When I started the Merge 2 years ago, my goal was to help people make sense of defense and do it in an enjoyable way. So you have a need to know, we scratch the itch, and we live at that intersection between military technology, history, policy, strategy, and industry. And then you sprinkle on a little bit of education with entertainment, and then you get what you get. And that's what we were trying to do. So moving on. Here's what I do know now that I am a seasoned episode 2 professional of hosting a podcast is that most experts say that the sweet spot for a podcast is somewhere between 1 and 3 voices. So I'm no expert. So this week we're going to chaff off that advice. So this episode, you're going to hear not 3, not 4, but 5 different voices on this episode if technology works. So we'll see what happens. It could be epic. It could be awful. Let's find out. Who do we have on? So roll call, we have Scar, Shaggy, Stinger, Vader, and myself. Those words mean nothing to you now. By the end of this episode, they will. And there's a reason why I brought them all on the show. And today, we're going to talk about Adversary Air. For perspective, the names I just rattled off collectively, there's over 8,000 hours of fighter time represented here. So first up the bat, we have Scar. He is a former Raptor dude. He works at Blue Force Tech, and he's trying to build some unmanned drones to go fly Adversary Air. Scar, say hi to everyone.
Hey, what's going on? Thanks, Paco, for the opportunity.
Awesome. Next up, we got Shaggy. He is man, he did a lot of stuff. He was a FAPE, flew the T-38, flew KC-135s, flew the Viper on active duty, retired, and somehow stumbled back into the Viper as a civilian flying aggressors for top aces. So thanks, Shaggy. Thanks for making the time to come on today.
Hey, thanks for the invite, Paco. This is really cool. Appreciate it.
Next up, we have Stinger. Stinger is a longtime friend of mine. We've known each other for more years than I could count. In his former life, he flew several thousand hours of about 70 different aircraft to include former Soviet Union aircraft. He was one of the people at Draken before Draken was a thing. Then he joined the active duty Air Force. He was a Strike Eagle backseater. He got fired or promoted, depending on what side of the fence you're on. He got moved to the front seat, came back to the jet. He's been flying a Strike Eagle, and he is currently still flying it. And he's talking about some adversary air efforts on the side. And so super interested to hear a little bit more about that in a bit. So thanks, Stinger, for coming on.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks.
And then our last and not least, Vader from Kodiak Shack podcast. A little bit similar to Stinger, depending on how you view it. He either downgraded or upgraded from the Viper to the F-15C model. He's in the TX course now, getting some scar tissue. So I'm definitely interested to hear about how some of his adversary air rides may have gone or not gone so far. So thanks, Vader, for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Paco.
And me, I've got about 2,200 hours total in the strike. I'm retired, and I'm a little bit like Bruce Wayne and Batman. So I have a day job as Bruce Wayne doing things that are in this space with autonomy and AI. And then at night, I'm running the Merge, and I'm your host of the podcast. Done with the admin. Let's talk about Adversary Air. For those who don't know, I looked this up. According to Congress, so there's a congressional report that defines it. It says Adversary Air, or Red Air, are missions, those which the air crews play a role of an adversary threat against air crews flying a blue, that's U.S. or allied force, training, sortie, or event. Shaggy, you do this for a living. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, that's a very dictionary definition, if you will. Obviously, when I talk to the general public or my family, like, what the hell do you do, dude? Basically, I say we're the professional bad guys. That's our job. Our job is to go up every day and be the bad guys to train against guys like Paco and Stinger, so you guys can flex your blue muscles and try out your tactics and make sure that your contracts work and the tactics work. And we're just there to be the training aid. We're there to be the best possible training aid you can be and die like men, turn around, regenerate, and give you some more pictures. So that's pretty much the best way I can describe it.
Awesome. You're like Robert Downey Jr. from Tropic Thunder.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
I think the obvious question is we'll get into what's going on in the past few years and where we think the next few years are heading. But I think the obvious question, which I'd like to talk with Stinger about, because him and I are kind of history buffs, is, we didn't have adversary air and aggressors, and certainly not contract aggressors, in World War II. We didn't have it in Korea. We didn't have it through most of Vietnam. And then suddenly we started seeing a lot of aggressors and adversaries and red air, and there was a lot of investment into the op-4 side of playing bad guys in the air. So Stinger, you're kind of a history buff from Vietnam. Do you have anything to color in with that?
Sure. Yeah. Kind of a nerd, so I'll just nerd out for a few minutes on all that. Probably the big start of it, I think, really happened throughout the 50s. We had like this huge spiral in technology and different types of innovation, and pretty incredible at the time. I mean, for perspective, if you think we went from fabric wing biplanes, the SR-71, in about 48 years, which is pretty cool. And then to contrast that to today, F-15 had its first flight in 1972, and 50 years later, we're still flying the F-15. So the technology spiral isn't quite the same as it was, back in the 50s. But there's also a downside to that. When we had the nuclear focus and everything else, a lot of the senior leaders kind of believed that we could solve things through technology alone, and that technology was iterating so fast that we could provide basically pure technological answers to what they appear to be tactical problems at the time and operational problems, et cetera. And it really centered around the nuclear challenge. As it were, SAC, or Strategic Air Command, kind of dominated the culture, and then their culture was preserving assets and then preserving what technology they did have, which introduced this huge safety culture. So everything was very by the book, control-oriented, strict checklists, very safety culture that kind of shunned realistic training at the time, or what they viewed as dangerous training. Roll into Korea, the U.S. Air Force does a pretty good job with F-86s against MiG-15s, et cetera. And they're kind of hanging on a lot of experiences that they had from World War II and a lot of the talent that they had. Break. They get into Vietnam. The fighter weapons school at the time was still teaching to go to the merge in Fluid 4, and they really didn't know how to use the technology that they had. And some of the technology wasn't necessarily super reliable in combat conditions, or at least, it contrasted against test conditions. And that's a whole other conversation that we can get into at another point in time, realistic tests. In any case, guys were taking a bunch of losses, and they couldn't attribute it all to technology. A lot of it was a failure to tactically evolve. And so that's where the importance of realistic training came in, is that we not only we take this technology out, but we need to test our tactics against what a bandit might do, and all the nuances that come with it. At least from reading and everything, a lot of the guys that went initially into to Rolling Thunder, et cetera, believe that the MiG-17 was just an advanced MiG-15, and that we did pretty good against the MiG-15s in Korea, and tactics should be good, and what was in the Holy Scripture tactical book was good enough. And unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily the case. It caused a lot of evolution, later on, more specifically on the Navy side of the house, with Frank Alt, who's the USS Coral Sea commander. Wrote the famous Alt report, in which he kind of poo-pooed on the weapon system testing as well as the realistic training. And then in '68 they looked to form Top Gun and create realistic training, and they realized that, hey, if you're gonna actually fight good, you need to train like you fight. Later on, everything was born out of Red Flag, and I don't want to get into too much on the weeds on that, but that's where we got realistic training from the combat misfortune of many others.
Oh, that's a good summary. There's a couple of things that in that time frame to just drill down on just for a second. So the Red Baron report was the other one. That was in 1970.
Yep.
And that led to what we call DACT, which is Dissimilar Air Combat Training. And that was very within visual range focused. And at the time, there was there's 3 funny names that are probably worthy of mentioning here: Have Donut, Have Drill, and Constant Peg. Have Donut was the exploitation of the MiG-21 that happened in 1968. Have Drill was the exploitation of the MiG-17 in 1969. And then if you fast forward just a little bit, there's a thing called Project Constant Peg, more commonly referred to as the Red Eagles today, which was a classified squadron of MiG-17s, MiG-21s, and MiG-23s that operated from about 1977 to 1988. And they provided a realistic adversary to go fly against. The key there is that is all focused on within visual range. Okay, that time is we are fixing ourselves, and that's what we're focused on. Fun fact, you guys know where the name Constant Peg comes from? Oh, Shaggy with the answer. What do you got?
Yeah, so Gail Peck, who was the whole founder of Constant Peg, that was his first wife's name. Peg was her name. Constant was the code word for whatever secret squirrel shit they were doing, but Peg was her name.
That's right. He named the program after his wife. That's right. You win a cookie.
Or scotch,
Or scotch, yeah, that too. I can't give you scotch or a cookie through the microphone, but So in that same note, what happened soon after, and this is all like late 60s, early 70s, the Air Force followed suit, and they activated the aggressor squadrons as formal training for bad guys. It started with the T-38s and F-5s, and then it matured into the F-15C and the F-16s with the aggressors that you have at Nellis. And now we have a handful of F-35s. At the same time, Top Gun was doing the same thing. However, and this is where things start to change, right about the same year that Top Gun, the movie, came out. If you watch the movie, you see the old MiG-28 and the A-4s that they're fighting against. The Navy had basically adopted a position that these are no longer good for us. We need to get something that replicates a 4th generation Russian fighter, so a MiG-29, a Su-27. And to do that, they actually ended up buying F-16s. Imagine that. F-16Ns, and they had some different stuff in the Air Force F-16s. They flew them for a while. But the whole point is that the Air Force and the Navy, by the mid-'80s, realized that they had to shift from just within visual range to beyond visual range. And that changes considerably the technologies that you need to either replicate that or to defeat that based on your tactics. So the tactics change, the technology changes, which means how we replicate it has to change. The problem, though, is that you can't just paint an aircraft a different color and put it beyond visual range, and now it's suddenly something else. That's not how the real world works. So there was this growing divide between blue and red. And if you look at the past 15 years especially, the advances and the proliferation of technology, whether it's advanced radars or wideband EO/IR systems and out-of-band missiles and electronic warfare and signature management and stealth, and all of this is getting proliferated everywhere. And so there's a growing divide between what we are flying against and training against in the air and what the bad guys are actually able to do. And so that's kind of how we arrive at the problem in the past probably 7 years or so. And Shaggy, you when did you go to industry and top aces?
I retired about 9 years ago out of Nellis, 3 years in the aggressors, DO and commander, and then 422 doing F-35 bed down. And I did business development for Northrop Grumman for about 2.5 years. And then got a different business development job with Northrop to get back to Utah in the mountains, which is where I like to be. But it got me reintroduced to the adversary air world because Northrop was doing a bunch of sustainment stuff on the F-5s and the T-38s and even the F-16. They have a lot of content on the F-16. So kind of got back in the adversary air world. And so I got hired about 4 years ago into Top Aces because they represented something that I saw when I was in the aggressors that I just didn't see in industry. And I'm like, this company's kind of got a vision. They're seeing the future and they're investing in it. And so that's where I got my start in industry on the adversary air side.
Awesome. And Stinger, you worked at Draken before they got their first contract, if I remember. Right as that was happening, you were transitioning into the Air Force. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was we were flying L-39s and a bunch of other stuff, and then looking to buy fighters, and came through a guy named Jared Isaacman, who's a good friend, and this all happened kind of on a bar napkin, but and I didn't really have any experience in the Air Force at the time, but a lot of the dudes who did and who were fighter guys could not undersell the importance of good red air. And there was a huge deficit in the ability for frontline fighter units to be able to get good training. And the aggressors are awesome. They're just not enough. We need more aggressors, basically, and to be able to fulfill these requirements. And so it seems like an obvious answer. Plus, it was a money-saving, answer for the government too. Like the numbers worked like way better. It's pretty nuts.
If you don't know Jared, awesome dude, probably famous for having one of the most badass paint jobs on a jet today with his MiG. So if you don't know what it looks like, I'll drop a link somewhere. I'll figure it out. So it's awesome. I actually worked in the Pentagon and Congress at about the same time that all this was starting to come to fruition. I don't know if you guys back then and the 2015, 2016 timeframe, you're like, man, we're flying a lot of red air against ourselves. In fact, I think I logged more red air time than blue air time. This is not good. And when you look at the capabilities as we field more and more advanced aircraft, they get challenged, and the use cases of them require certain force ratios and things like that. And that drove this red air bill that was just an unsolvable problem at the time. So Congress actually figured that out too, and they made the Air Force come up with a plan. And so back in 2017, they delivered a plan to Congress. And that report said that the Air Force for adversaries training requires somewhere between 60 and 120,000 sorties a year. Not hours, sorties. And that's for Adversary Air. That is impossible. There's not enough. It costs too much. There's not enough pilots. We don't have the infrastructure. If you were to build an Air Force to do that, you'd have the world's 10th largest Air Force or something. It's crazy. So there's a huge variance there of how you're going to solve this problem. And so industry stepped up to the plate, and they actually made I don't want to call it a consortium, but they kind of all got together and said, hey, if you change a couple of things, if Congress helps us out, we can actually do something with this. So in 2018, there used to be a law, if you contract Adversary Air, it's considered a service. It's like you're, mow the lawn on base and, clean the bathrooms like that. It was lumped into that. And so there's a law that says you can only have a 5-year limit on contracts for services. So if Shaggy at Top Aces is going to go out and buy a fleet of F-16s, his investors are probably going to want a little more guarantee that like, hey, in 5 years, like you may get booted off the island. Like no matter what, you have to recompete. So the Air Force and industry went to Congress and said, hey, if you can change this to like a 10-year thing, maybe we have some options in there, but at least we have the ability to perform. We can go to our investors. We can make investments. There is actually a business case to help industry can help you solve your problem. And so that's kind of where things started to change. And the original plan, when they went to Congress, it said, if we take the minimum amount of red air we have to fly, which was 60,000 hours, and you pretty much cut that in half, the number I think that was agreed upon, and Shaggy, you can correct me, it was something like 35 or 37,000 hours is the number that you hear in press even today. This happened 4 or 5 years ago. The reason the number matters is because the Air Force is budgeting to it. And so the plan that came out of this was what was called the CAF-CAS program, the Combat Air Forces / Contracted Air Support Program. We're going to talk about the left part of the slash today, which is the Combat Air Forces. That's the air-to-air stuff. The contracted air support is JTACs and close air support. So you contract out the guys who fly in circles. We're not going to talk about that today. So the plan was 10-year contracts for $6.4 billion to fly about those 37,000 hours. And we're going to do it every year and at 12 bases. And so that was a huge win. Everyone was like, great, I don't have to fly as much red air. We can get some dissimilar training. We're going to get some new guys in the airspace. We'll figure out what's what. It's like some super experienced guys like Shaggy are going to show me a thing or two, punish my blue mistakes. This is going to be great. Shaggy, how's that going? Didn't really pan out, did it?
Well, it's getting there, but you're right. It's taken longer than everyone wanted, and it's a little bit of a chicken or egg, right? It's from two different perspectives. The Air Force perspective was, hey, industry, we need you to stand this up immediately. But to your point earlier about the whole investment thing, and now having been on the civilian commercial side, investors aren't just going to go, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, here's about $100 million to stand something like that up. They don't play that game, and so the commercial civilian investors had to go, well, show me what this is really going to be. And so it was, companies like Draken were fantastic with Jared's investment, and he had a great vision to start this and just invest on his own. To be perfectly honest, invest on his own and just show up with the hardware, and that's how it kind of all got started. And then the other companies, like the Tough Aces and Tactical Air Support and ATAC and Area USA, they're like, hey, we can do this too. And it just came down to a lot of chicken or egg stuff. So the IDIQ, the big indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract that was awarded about 3 years ago to the 5 companies to do the Adversary Air, that was a big step because it enabled, particularly Top Aces, but I think the other companies too, an impetus to invest. It's like, okay, you're serious about this. You're really going to award, maybe not all 12, Paco, like the plan was, and they haven't done that yet, but certainly that's the plan. And so, I can at least speak from our investors that was like, yeah, this is the signal we need to go ahead and invest. So I think the other companies kind of are in this very similar situation, and we're willing to invest, say, in the Air Force, which is the U.S. Air Force, single biggest provider of adversary air in the world. If they're saying we're going, we're going. So I think that's kind of how it really got started.
Thanks for the context. Scar, were you still flying the Raptor when this was all going on?
I was, yep.
Did you fly any against contractor adversaries?
Yeah, so we flew some against Draken in my previous life, both at the so I flew as an FTU instructor down at Tyndall in the Raptor, and then, but we shouldn't leave out the fact that there is some indigenous adversary air through T-38s. Those provide meaningful lines. We could talk about quality, quantity here in a minute, but there's also capability provided as far as iron up in the sky there. But I think we all have actually been fortunate enough to fly against not just the indigenous aggressors, whether they be at Nellis or Eielson, but also the contract bubbles like Shaggy. I think it's awesome.
Vader, you went from the Viper to the C model. You're getting your lumps in the TX course. Have you done TI yet?
I have not. Only in the sim, so it doesn't really count.
No, it doesn't count. Do you guys have a contract on site for Red Air up there right now?
Yeah, there is contract Red Air. They've got the F5s out here that are flying around doing the TI, and then it's augmented by other C models kind of bolstering the red pictures.
Nice. Just for mostly just make us all jealous, when's the last time you flew?
Yesterday.
Jerk.
Stinger, Stinger, when did you fly last?
It was Monday, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nailed it.
It's been a whole. It's only Tuesday. Yeah, it's yesterday. Wait a minute. All right, Shaggy, when did you last fly?
It was a week ago. I double turned.
Yeah, last time I talked to you, you're like, man, I'm busy. I'm double turning. I'm like, I don't know if that's like a humble brag or what. But
it's total brag. There's no humble. It's total brag.
You guys are all a bunch of jerks, is what you are.
It's all right. I got beat up the whole time, so.
So Stinger, you're the only guy that's currently sitting in an ops flying assignment right now. So how many times a month are you flying, and then what are those like blue versus red? What's your proportion looking like?
Yeah, so I normally fly about 9 to 10 probably lines per month, and then I would say about 40% of those are Red Air for us, but it really depends on what phase the squadron is going for, as you know. So if it's a surface phase or something like that, obviously not flying as much Red Air, but if it's air to air, then you're flying a ton, especially if they have a bunch of upgrades to do. And I kind of want to circle back to Shaggy's point there on the early days of the contract stuff was difficult because we tried to pitch a lot of the A4 stuff early on, and the numbers made total sense. What the training requirements for the FTU made sense. Like it was a no-brainer at all. And we were getting a lot of pushback from a lot of commanders because we were, going to try to take away from their flying hour program or something like that. Whatever it was, but it was just, the answer is no. And Jared took a huge leap. I mean, from so the business plan looks awesome from this will work. The problem is getting the customer to say, yeah, I see the logic there. And you're oftentimes dealing with a very illogical customer. Who is you have a lot of of these empires set up in the Air Force, and nobody wants to be encroached upon. and they kind of want their empire to function as it always was. So that's some of the problems that we ran into, and then eventually Draken had to go through the guard and some other stuff, and I remember sitting there with PowerPoints, and it was just like, listen, like, you have this problem, you're not putting out this amount of students because you're losing lines to maintenance and this and that. And you got Jess going through mods and all kinds of other stuff. We can do this because you're not doing anything complex. We have radars on the jet and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, no, sorry, we're not interested. Like, okay, like I just don't get it. And I think I still have the emails from specific commanders just saying, I don't want anything to do with it, and so it was pretty funny. So
I would love to see those emails and the names.
Yeah, I think we may both know. We both know a few of them. So
it's 2022. How'd that work out for you?
It's ridiculous. So when Jared put a lot of his own capital obviously into it, because the whole name of the game for him was a Field of Dreams, right? Build it and they will come. And that was the hard, like the chicken and the egg sort of thing. That was the hard part of that. You couldn't get a contract unless you had iron on the ramp, essentially. But then you weren't even guaranteed the contract. But like Shaggy was saying, no investor in their right mind would be like, wait a minute. First of all, you're dealing with the DoD. Okay, that's not a great bet to begin with. Now you want how many millions of dollars and operating O&M costs and all this sort of stuff. It's just like, okay, I can go somewhere else and make money. Like this is a pretty risky bet.
What's the saying? It's like, how do you become a millionaire working with the Department of Defense? You start out as a billionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
So you fly about 40% red air. So just for the listeners, if you fly 10 sorties a month of red air, does that count towards like your readiness that you report back to the Pentagon?
Yeah, so technically I think one sortie a month counts as readiness, and I can't remember if they changed it to 2, but I'm pretty sure it's just 1 right now. And obviously it's not even close to like a doc statement mission or true readiness, but neither here nor there.
Yeah, I won't put everyone on the spot, but I can definitely vouch for the times that I, you log what you need to log, and you fly what you need to fly. So many times we have flown red air and done a target attack and called it, SAT or basic surface attack or whatever I needed to maintain my my status for the month. Definitely not the right thing to do. I think at the end of the day, we're in the trenches just trying to, keep the fight going as long as we can on the front lines. So not a good position we want to be in. So I definitely appreciate that. I know all of us here, even if we're not flying anymore or not flying in a uniform. Shaggy, you're like you're the in between guy. You're still flying, but you're not in uniform. But I only feel half-sided for you.
Fair enough.
So I just want to spend like 2 minutes or so and just foot stomp. Like the easy button is probably like, man, someone's out there listening goes, DCS is amazing. The amount of things that you can do in it is amazing. Why don't you just give everyone like DCS and let them fly in the sim? Here's your VR goggles, like, have a nut. Why do we still need the live fly? And I'm asking this, I already know the answer, but I don't want to hear myself talk too much. So Scar, do you want to jump in? Like, why do we need the live fly? Why can't we just do it in the sim?
Yeah, because you have to put yourself into the physiological challenges associated with live flight. You need to you need to feel your inner ear, the pressure equalization. You need to feel the vibrations of the jet. You need to deal with real world malfunctions of your equipment. You need to feel the G, get a little dehydrated, and still work under pressure of external circumstances. There is no limit to the value of why we need to go in live fly.
Yeah, my favorite, there's a few really good YouTube videos out there where they took I think there's some Tomcat ones, but there's some good YouTube videos of fighter pilots who flew the actual aircraft. They put them in DCS and they're like fumbling all over the place, and you're just getting schooled by all these kids. And all right, well, if the roles are reversed, we put you in an airplane. Like, you think you can fly it? Like, no. Like, it's not the same. So you need a blend. You need a blend of both. It's a blended solution. Turns out most complex things are not binary. It's a very complicated thing. Okay, so Shaggy, we talked about, you said you went to Top Aces many years ago. You started in business development, though, right?
I did. Yep, doing F-35 business development.
Yeah, so you got promoted, right?
Within the company, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got hired as the chief pilot because we need to stand up an F-16 organization in the U.S. and as the with the aggressor background, we have a very strong aggressor culture with top bases. That's kind of what we're centered around. So I basically got hired because of my network of aggressor dudes, and that's basically mostly who we hire, not entirely, but mostly. And then from there, I've been program manager and some other and BD, and now I'm back to program management. Now that we actually have a program to manage, so I've kind of done a lot of different stuff with the company, but it's all centered around the F-16 flying business.
Got it. I just want to summarize what he just said. He might be the first person in the history of fighter pilots to get promoted into a flying job. That almost every time you get promoted out of a flying job. So whatever you
it
did,
is unique. That is
it's
unique.
magic. Congratulations, you did it. You're the guy. You're the one.
I'll take it.
But you have a pulse of what's going on in the industry right now, and so you talked about there's a little bit of growing pains. It's maybe getting up on glide path where it needs to be for the contract and the support we need. Earlier this year, so we talked about Draken. So the elephant in the room is their contract option I think it was an option, did not get extended earlier this year at Nellis. And I know that that was probably like 3 or 4 years into a 10-year contract or something like that. And so there's probably an option that just didn't get executed at that point. Did that send kind of like a ripple through industry? Because I saw that news and I was like, ooh, like that made headlines across the fighter community, because that's that's a pretty well-known name in industry, and they provide a lot of great services. And so how did that ripple through industry, or how was it received?
Well, you nailed it. It did totally ripple. I mean, it surprised a lot of people. I mean, and it was one of those things that some people saw it coming, but maybe not very many. And here's really interesting, just total coincidence. We just happened to be on a VTC with the 57th Wing Commander the day that got announced. We didn't know it was going to be announced. We had set this call up with Johnny Bravo there at the 57th Wing at the time, and he said the Air Force is just at an inflection point where up until that point, capacity was what the Air Force needed. With the drawdown of the forces and the Air Force aggressors just being totally overtasked, they needed capacity. And he said this is the point where we're going from capacity to capability, and capacity is still needed. There's no question. It's not a one or a zero. To your point, it's not binary. It's both. But the Air Force had at least at the leadership level made that shift to we need more capability in the adversary air to challenge and to challenge the fifth gen, especially because it wasn't being challenged enough with what was there. The numbers are important, but then so is the ability for the guys to shoot back at you.
Yeah, I remember, and I can't remember exactly who we were flying against, but there's definitely some stories of people flying against some of the contract that era. I can't remember the company, can't remember the platform, but the max speed that they were able to do was much slower than they were trying to replicate. So they had these modified weapons tables. So they were shooting missiles at longer ranges than kinematically they should be able to. Well, closure is a two-way conversation. So the jets are flying much slower than they're supposed to be based on the kinematics that the platform is replicating. But on the blue side, you don't have the closure to get a whiz to shoot back. And so we had a lot of guys that were like really experienced guys that for about a few weeks were all dying, and they're like, I am doing everything, like in the debrief, like show me what I'm doing wrong. Like I got nothing for you. Like I don't. Like if it's so we're learning the wrong lessons out of this. We're wasting taxpayer money. We're actually like getting some negative training, and now you start trying to game the system. Now you're gaming your sparring partner instead of trying to actually get better. Iron sharpens iron. I think Scar has some something about his Michigan State football team that he likes to talk about. Apparently they're good, maybe not. But I'll let him talk about that in a minute.
It's basketball season. That's what we go for. We go for basketball season. That's what it is.
So do your analogies for training change with the seasons of sports?
Dude, just like with the wind, man. Just go with the wind. It's all good.
Just go with it. All right. I love it. So Shaggy, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is you guys made a significant investment in something that no one else had been doing yet. And whether you made a drug deal or somehow found some F-16s to buy, and so you have some not just F-16s but special F-16s. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm pretty interested.
Sure. So, the F-16s we got are from Israel, and they're standard one each, Block 10, 1979 F-16. So, it's a great fourth-gen platform, but without the advanced aggressor mission system that we put on it, it's not going to be anything more useful to a fifth-gen fighter than a 1979 F-16. So, the advanced aggressor mission system was envisioned, 5 years ago by our company to be able to bring this next step to the adversary industry, and it's platform agnostic because it's flying on the A4s right now over in Europe. It's flying on our F-16 down at Tyndall and soon to be at Luke. And it's basically it's an open architecture system. The whole point was to plug and play, because we know that the threat evolves constantly. And so to kind of lock yourself in as a company, a commercial company, to one solution, we didn't really like that idea. We like the idea of, hey, when the customer comes to us and says, hey, I'm more interested in NERST, or I'm more interested in advanced EW, or I'm more interested in whatever it is, we can very quickly, speed of business, not the speed of government, speed of business, we can swap that LRU out or swap that sensor out, and it still works. So we own the OFP. We don't have to go to Lockheed Martin. We don't have to go to the Air Force for permission to change it. It's 100% ours, and it makes it incredibly adaptable and flexible. And so, we've done all that work to integrate ANISA and the Scorpion helmet and Link 16 and multiple other things. And it's a very short step to get add AIM-9X to add. We've already done the work on the ERST. So to us, it's like it's the plug and play feature that enables things like with SCAR and Blue Force Tech, the man-on-man teaming, the CCA activity that the Air Force wants to use the ad-air side to mature so they can use it on an actually tactically significant blue side, and just that open architecture ability that's proven. We've already proven it over and over, and now we're flying it. Is just to us, it was just the obvious choice for the future.
Awesome. So do you have any stories that you could share about how you may have punished some blue mistakes with your souped up F-16? Especially, I know Vader's coming from the Viper. We had the toy Mexican radar that we generally just make fun of these days. But you have taken off and landed a few times in the C model. So you now have I think a 20-year-old ESA radar. So you have the oldest ESA radar in the U.S. military. I think Shaggy is flying with literally the newest ESA radar flying in and around the U.S. military right now. So it's newer than the F-35's radar. It's newer than the Strike Eagle's radar. Tell us a little bit about it. It's pretty good. Suck? Yes, no, maybe?
It's good. So it's been flying against the Lake and Heath Strike Eagles and F-35s for about the last year. And so it's proven, and it definitely works. It's certainly not as advanced as anything that the U.S. has, because this is a non-U.S. radar. But it certainly does the job. It does it very well. I would love to tell you the cool stuff we've done with our F-16 advanced aggressor fighter. The problem is, you'll understand, you'll totally sympathize with this. The time it's taken to get the approvals for the spectrum management is, I'll just put it this way. We flew this jet, under FCC test rules in January 19th of this year. We just got the approvals to fly it into the Air Force last week. So that's the painful part that we've had. The jet's been, souped up and sitting there ready to rock, and we haven't actually been able to fly it. We just got that approval last week, so we should be putting it to use here at Tyndall pretty soon. But it's been flying on the same system as flying on the A4, and it's doing very well.
I could imagine the sensitivities of shooting a non-U.S. ESA radar at one of our stealth fighters and seeing the return signals and detection.
There's a few security concerns there.
Yeah, so we won't talk about that. But yeah, ESA radars are awesome. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, you guys recently won a contract, like a $175 million contract. Is Tyndall? You're already at Tyndall, but now you got the Hill for F-35. Is that right?
No, this is a contract for both Tyndall and Luke. So it's an additional Adversary Air capability. ATAC already has F1s at both Tyndall and Luke, and this is additional capability that the Air Force wanted to upgrade to 4th Gen Capes Plus with our AAF. So we're additive. So we're flying with ATAC at both locations, and we get along great with those guys. But we're just bringing that next level from the industry to the customer. And so that's the same, like you said, about a 5-year contract to make that happen.
I'm glad that you talked a little bit about the strategic value of having that open systems architecture and being able to like port that over. It's very modular and has extensibility, because Stinger, going back to Stinger, he wrote an article a few months ago, and actually I didn't get a chance to even talk to him about this. I saw it hit War on the Rocks, and I was like, oh, hey, it's Stingers. I read it, and then I got busy and I forgot to follow up. So my bad. I suck as a friend. So we're going to talk about it now in front of everyone instead. So the name of the article is Train Like You Fight, Updating America's Adversary Fleet. And it's about the F-117, actually. I'll put a link in the show notes. But big picture, a little bit of history in the F-117, and then I'll hand it over to Stinger to really talk about what he wanted to talk about. So F-117 was developed in the 80s. It was in service in the late 80s. I think, was it Panama was the first actual combat use of the F-117. Didn't turn out too well, but it totally redeemed itself in Desert Storm. It was officially retired in 2008, but you have some binoculars, you can see it flying around for many, many years. They used it for follow-on testing for cruise missile surrogates and other things. And so look at the pictures online. They did some next-gen materials sciences and coatings. Have been flying a couple F-117s that don't look black. And then in the past about 2 years, a lot of people started seeing the F-117 going a lot of places that it wasn't going. As it was flying during the day, it was flying off station, and they were started to use them as off-station adversary air assets for some non-Nellis units. So that kind of gets us to where I think Stinger wants to talk about, which is what is the opportunity there of maybe scaling up that model and maybe using some of the stuff that Shaggy's been developing.
Yeah, so that's great, and thanks for being the only other person that read that article too. So I think that makes two of us. So
I read it.
Oh, thanks. There's actually a lot of stuff in there. It looks very kind of JV, I think. There's a lot of stuff in there. Obviously, I can't just blurt out and say, and there's a lot of obvious, of course, things. But the big idea really stems from the capital investment that. And preservation of the Red Air as a whole enterprise, of how we want to do that. And I think that the Blue Force Tech and the unmanned part of it is a huge piece. Hey,
that's my segue. Don't get to that yet.
Oh,
that's coming up next.
I just gotta lay it down for this whole thing, but. We'll focus on the man piece for this, and how that fits in. And so, if I were king for a day, and I think Scar and I may be collaborating on an article that's coming out pretty soon, but basically you would take the Red Air Enterprise and you would use it as kind of an OTDT test bed for all these companies, cyber hopefuls and all this sort of other stuff, and then start shaping Blue Air and Blue Air acquisitions, and then focusing stuff a little bit better and all that. And anyways, I'll save all that jazz for a later time, but you can't undersell the importance of Red Air, and the problem that we ran into with it is capital. So I think Top Ace is super wise, getting hold of the Israeli F-16s, and there'll probably be some more F-16s that are up for sale, here and there and stuff. But once you go beyond that early fourth gen fighter, it's going to start to be a lot harder. Once you get into more expensive airframes, to be able to replicate Red Air in say 10 years, 15 years, etc. And then start training against LO threats. And one of the answers, I was talking to a guy from a company called Demar Tech, which they handle a lot of stuff involving the F-117 and some other ventures there. The government has these jets in what's called Type 1000 and Type 4000 storage, and basically they're preserving them, and they represent assets that are already purchased, essentially, that can be revitalized and then can be utilized under a government, kind of a contractor-operated, government-owned sort of, deal, or any other type of a vehicle that you could come up with. The importance really is getting more and more assets that are there and available and fit a certain niche, and this niche happens to be LO. yeah, you're right. We have seen a couple bouncing around here and there, and I think there's some pictures of some at Fresno and then down at Savannah and et cetera. But frontline fighter units need better red air than organic red air, and so between the top aces F-16s and between a lot of the other ones, they're doing great work. We just need more, and we need more types and different types and more niche capabilities. So the article really was an effort to say, hey, we have these here, and there's going to be 100 people that say no, that'll never work. It's too expensive. We can't, restore all this sort of stuff. Copy. I get the argument. I understand it's hard, but so is losing a war. So is not training realistically. So is all these other things that are really, very intangible that you may not be able to throw on a PowerPoint scale when you're pitching something. But we pull those out. We use them for red air as kind of an interim, and then you may be able to start creating a model in which contractors are able to use government operated aircraft rather than them completely divesting them and then throwing them out on the open market. So there's something there, and then also the other piece is bringing on the cyber hopefuls and other companies that are developing some really cool tech, and they're doing it at the speed of business. And then they're using that money from through contract vehicles for red air to be able to do that. Red air companies are benefiting as well. And so ultimately you're making the defense enterprise way better as a whole by creating this red air ecosystem that's really challenging blue air and really doing what it's supposed to do,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. If I remember right, there's about 65 or so F-117s that were built. Stinger, you probably know this better than me. Out of the 65, there's about 60 or so that actually were production. And then the last number that I knew of was the Air Force still possessed 48. I don't know how many of those 48 are in storage and how many are flying. Do you know what the ratio is right now?
I think it's classified. If I'm
all right. Well, all those numbers are open source. I just said, so don't arrest me. Yeah. At the end of the day, let's assume that half of them are available, right? So you basically have an entire squadron of F-117s, which may not sound like a lot, but that's like 10 times as many as aggressor F-35s there are right now. I think there's two that are in service, and I think there's two more, right, that are on the way. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
So paying an F-35 a different color and put it on the on bad guy's side is not that's not a value proposition the Air Force wants to do either. Again, you want the pros from Dover, but you can't scale that. It's one of the soft truths. You can't scale soft. It's the same thing with kind of aggressors. You need a whole fighting force. You can't just have your exquisite solutions because you just can't afford it. So that teases out we said it's a complex problem. It's probably not unsolvable, but nothing is binary. It requires a lot of different approaches. So this is where we get into SCAR. SCAR, you've been patient. You had some battery issues. You're back. You got the spare. You're back in the vol. Tell me about what you are trying to do from Blue Force Tech that's approaching us from a slightly different angle.
It really comes down to filling out that ecosystem with yet another capability, as Stinger alluded to. And oftentimes, if you hear people talk about training, they often talk about things in three different buckets. LVC is the acronym they use. Live for the L, virtual, which would be like the sim, and then constructive, which is injecting fake things in the real world. And oftentimes I think, just to throw this out there, I don't think this is a controversial statement, but I hear LVC thrown around as a buzzword enough. I think that when people say LVC, what they really mean is the C. They don't really mean hey, let's get live better, or hey, let's get the sims better. When they say, hey, we're going to go do this in we're going to make LVC work, what they really mean is injecting fake stuff into live, which is the constructive. And so I think whenever that is what I often hear, I'd be curious to get some feedback on that. But, people wrongly use the LVC term when they really just mean let's make constructive better. And that is our way to get after additional training. I think it is a problematic way. In Paco, not to derail your entire podcast, we could probably go another hour about the value of the constructive side of the live virtual construction ecosystem.
It sounds like an encore. It sounds like a good encore episode.
Just as a baseline, right? So let's not talk about the sim, like VR goggles. Let's not talk about constructive, which is injecting fake stuff that your radar and sensors won't actually see. It may not accurately replicate. It may not realistically fly against. So let's talk about the lie, because we've already demonstrated the value of why getting air under an operator's butt is the right answer. And so when you have the confluence of advanced manufacturing and advanced computing, you can actually produce a high performance, unmanned, low observable fighter that is software defined, that can fulfill a lot of those live requirements that Stinger is getting after and Shaggy is trying to solve. And we've all entirely flown way too many hours flying red airs because we need to get after better L, the live. And so what Blue Force did, and this is getting after the Cyber hopefuls, and really this is a Cyber AFWorks, success story, quite literally followed the map. Started with a Cyber phase 1, 50K, 3 months, open topic. Spent that door knocking at Air Combat Command, turned that into a fully matched, $1.7 million phase 2, developed, no kidding, provide engineering rigor. This isn't PowerPoint deep. And now because we've validated, and here's, a side note as well, if you take, was it calendar year 21 Adversary Air cost per flying hour of the entire Raptor fleet, it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars we spent on red air, and yet we have a hard time going to your O&M problem. Like, no, I can't use that money better. And so this is where cynical Scar is about to come out. So the real issue here is, so to continue on with Blue Force, then turn that into a strap buy awardee, opportunity, Cyber, and we're working on developing our jet, and I'm there's some meaningful test that's going to happen here soon. So I what this means is that unmanned systems, and I think when people think about unmanned systems, we may think about long loader ISR in the counterterrorism world. For the unmanned systems, you may think about like the impact of DJI quadcopters in Ukraine, which is meaningful. But I think here you have an opportunity to like rapidly iterate and develop software-defined, high-performance unmanned vehicles to get after the replication for adversary training. And when I think about adversary training, you guys, we've kind of alluded to this. You have to like look, act, and smell like your adversary. You can't be a blue air fighter. You have to look, act, and smell like your adversary. So look, that's principally think about radar cross-section. We have to replicate the best we can our pacing threats, radar cross-section. And when I say look, I mean like what does the dude or dudette see when they look at the glass in their cockpit? It says look, act, you have to turn, execute tactics, behave like the adversary, and then smell, that principally means RF emissions. So what's coming off of your jet? And if you do all of those things appropriately, then you can replicate anything. Because software definability really has opened up that aperture. And what is really unfortunate is when guys like Vader or Stinger or Paco, you and I in a previous life would fly red air, we have to tune our systems, that's the smell. We have to change our tactics, that's the act. We may actually change how we look, which doesn't actually provide meaningful training or readiness at all. And so we're spending, to put a bow on this, hundreds of millions of dollars on not doing anything meaningful. And so that is where the opportunity lies.
Scar, two things. I grabbed my phone. To look this up with my handy calculator. If you take the 30,000 sorties a year, which again is organic, this is not contracted, organic support, and let's assume that there's some magical fighter the Air Force has that costs $17,000 an hour, which most of them don't. That costs more than that. That's $500 million a year in operating costs, flying around, pretending to be bad guys when, number one, we're not professional bad guys, so we suck at it. So we can't actually punish blue mistakes because we if you spend more time trying to be the bad guy instead of be the good guy, it doesn't work out for you when you actually have to be the good guy in real life. So you can't LARP your way into a win that way. The second thing is, Scar, I never heard someone say that you have to smell like the bad guy. That is a new one. That's a new one.
I'll let your mind wander there, Paco, on what I.
No. So the reason, and what I was reminded of is, you're right. In tuning our systems and doing things so they can pretend like their systems are not, just for training. As it turns out, most systems don't have that built in. I will say that when we were in my last life, when we do like software development for all the fighters and things like that, the F-35, they had actually thought of this, right? So they said, hey, we're going to put this it's called ET, this embedded threat system in the F-35. You can do some cool stuff with it, and it has a ton of potential. The issue is when the government gets $1, it can either use that to advance a combat capability or enhance a training capability. And when you look at the return on investment, 10 times out of 10 for those decisions, and I've been in the room for them, the operators go, what I really want is I want a better embedded threat. I want a better way to train to this. I want a better way to train to that. And then the test guys who have access to like, here's what's coming down the pipe for the F-35. If we can just, line this capability off and then give you this in training, like, no, I want the capability. Give me the combat capability. We'll make do with what we have. And that is the trade. And that's how execution happens every time. So it's nice to say that we could detune and smell like the bad guys. But when it comes to actually putting the money there to do it, that dollar has to have a return on investment. And we know the value of that. But we may also not know what the opportunity cost of spending that dollar here versus there. So that is a continual challenge that I see.
Yeah, if I can pile on to that, Paco, I think we believe in a lot of circles that we need to have a bunch of exquisite golden BBs, and that is the answer to deterrence. When I think we would all probably agree that training is a deterrence. The fact that the boxer you're about to go fight against has better training, better sparring partner, better facilities than you, it is hard to get into that ring. And so I personally believe that training actually is deterrence. And the other thing, so you go like, so in my mind, I go, what is the cost of not doing, training enhancements? It is maybe it doesn't deter as well as, not having poor training doesn't deter near as well as having good training, right? That's my John Madden quote for the evening. The other thing too is the DoD, at least in word recently, has said that they see value in training. I think it was down at ITSEC this last round a couple weeks ago. There was a flag level panel that said, hey, at the OSD level, 2023 is going to be the year of training. And so I want to see some action behind that, because I think that there is reasonable requirement for us to modernize our ranges. Part of ranges are the airspace, the connectivity of everything, certainly the surface-to-air weapons or missile system replicators. But the fourth pillar to range modernization for enhanced and capable training is the adversary air piece. You have to have all of them if you want to have true training deterrence. And so this is where an all of everything approach, gets into play, where we have to have those contract providers, we have to have manned ad air, and we absolutely need unmanned ad air for the ability to have swappable sensors, software defined tactics, et cetera, and then learn on CCAs. And we can bog on CCAs if you want there, Paco.
That's another good topic for another day. I'm reminded of the range modernization efforts. Now, it'll make sense in a second. The surface to air threats, like, hey, we need new emitters, we need more accurate replicators in the range. And there's all different types of initiatives that were going on in the past, 7 years or so. And there's, ARTS is probably the biggest one. There's different versions that do different things. And I remember being in the rooms, we're looking at the programmatic discussions and like, well, great. You fixed the RF environment, but like the IR signature of this is jacked. Like, they go back and fix the IR signature. Like, well, now the SAR, the synthetic aperture radar mapping, it doesn't look like it either. Like, you go fix that, and like you're basically re-engineering a bad guy system. And I remember okay, we've got it. It's not accurate. It's like it'll give you like the 80% solution. I'm like, this is 5 times more than the real bad guy stuff. Like, I can't buy this. It's like I can just go I can go start a war and just take all their stuff. Like, I would be better off than if I try to buy all this and put it on. It's like, for $5 billion, you can upgrade the threat emitters on the Nellis range. I'm like, no congressman in the world is going to say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Really, it's about finding that right mix, that blend of attributes, and put it in the right environment, whether it's live, whether it's virtual, whether it's constructive, what kind of signatures it have, what kind of scenario can I force that around to get the training, the sets and reps that are the value add. So you're not just boring holes in the sky and be like Stinger flying red air for most of his life.
Exactly.
All right, so I guess the is there a way forward? And when you look at aircraft, costs a lot of money. They're not getting any cheaper. There's a couple of options out there. Reforge, if you guys are familiar with that, was a good friend of mine, Mobile Homes. Shout out if he's listening. He rolled that out back in 2018, 2019. And it was about rebuilding the forge. That's why it's called Reforge. And it was about buying some T7s or leasing some T50s and kind of do this hybrid training on site. So to reduce the amount of moves for families, you would kind of grow up on a base flying a jet trainer, and then kind of transition to an ops squadron. Kind of similar to Baby Scar back in the day, where you might have flown the T-38 in Aggressors and then one across the street to the Raptor with kind of that embedded training. So here we are 4 years later talking about the same program, still not funded. So it looks great on PowerPoint, but when it comes time to invest that money, and I'm not sure, the T7, one of those articles, Scar, you put it on LinkedIn recently, you're talking about, well, hey, there's some options out here. The T7, it's maybe $25 million a copy, maybe not. Once you put sensors and stuff on it, you put Shaggy's good stuff that he's developed, maybe it's a lot more than 25 million. Who knows? What I do know is that whoever wants to buy him has to get in line. There's a $9.2 billion contract that Boeing has. That's a fixed price, by the way, to deliver 351 jets. So whoever wants to buy number 352, you can go ahead and sign up now, and whenever that shows up, that's going to be a long time. I guess the big question is what are the other options out there if for getting some new iron or younger iron? Eventually it will become an issue. You can't just take retired F-35s or retired early block Raptors just because their cost per flying hour is just too much. So you guys have any ideas? How are we going to solve world hunger?
Of course we have ideas. Is what the bar is for, I guess. You got to look at fundamentally different, right? You can't look in flying hour price. I think you need to look at what does it take money-wise to train a blue pilot or keep him ready or him or her ready for that month? What is the cost of readiness? Okay, once we break down the cost of readiness, we see that right now it's a huge cost for readiness when you fly, Raptors, etc. Once we put that into perspective, now we can look at whatever new investments that we have can drive down that cost. And a lot of it is in the unmanned sector. I think the whole F-117 idea really is more of an interim solution and use the rest of the life that they have and all that sort of stuff, right? Until we get some sort of other solution out there. What I think we could do eventually would be, you might be able to have F-16s or some other fighter that you can get industry to start putting cool different types of RAM on it and start playing with a lot of other sorts of technologies that come out of that industry that we put on these fighters as another interim solution until we can figure out what is the next step after that from an actual, more specific to your question, iron wise. And that may mean bringing on more of an aviation industry into the U.S. and saying that, hey, maybe Red Air has gone to this point where now it's its own big system that can actually bring in fighter manufacturers or airframe manufacturers, et cetera, even be manned fighter manufacturers, and then augment the Boeing Lockheed consortium sort of thing, which would ultimately, in my opinion, the more competitors you have on the fighter market, the better you are overall from a Blue Air side. Another conversation for another day, but that's it.
Yeah, and if you, to your point, if you approach it from like, hey, this is not just a military problem, this is a industry problem, this is an aviation industry problem, the commercial industry, there's a pilot shortage. By the way, like 90% of all the pilots in the United States are trained in the military. Well, there's more people getting out that are being produced. How do you fix that? We can get a whole conversation about pilot retention and production. At the end of the day, what about building an industry that not only supports the military at a cost-effective business model, but also provides that grounds those cockpits to grow and rebuild the aviation industry? So, hey, we have, at any given time, there's 2,000 contract pilots that are flying for the government, getting hours to earn the time to be a commercial airline pilot. And then if they want to go to the airline industry, they can do that. So I think there's some interesting options and levers to pull that I don't think it's either not gotten bad enough for people to start really thinking disruptively, or there's just things that are just, out wedging it right now. So I don't know. I'll leave it at that. I don't think we're going to solve world hunger, and I don't want to ask Shaggy about his company's like future prospects of how they're going to solve this problem and give away all of his trade secrets. So I'm going to spare you that question, Shaggy. It's story time. So I would love to hear a story from each of you about Red Air. So either a great story where something just hilarious happened, or something where you just got completely slayed and like, man, that was epic fail. So Shaggy, go ahead. I want you to go first.
Well, I mean, I flew obviously 3 years in the aggressors, and now doing the top basis stuff. I've flown plenty of Red Air. But honestly, my best stories are not mine. I've lived a pretty boring life from the adversary perspective, but some of the guys that we've hired have done some pretty good stuff. So, for instance, we just started flying against the Tyndall, or against the Eglin F-22s a couple weeks ago, and a guy named Motor Coloris, one of my first hires. He just happened to have been in the aggressors in the early 2000s when the F-22 was going through IOT&E. So this poor guy, he came out of the C Model Eagle. He went to the F-16 aggressors, and his job for, I think it was at least one straight month, maybe two, was 6 days a week, double turning BFM in the Viper against the F-22.
Oh my God.
And it was 6 days a week because, of course, IOT&E is always behind the power curve, right? So this poor guy has to do that for like 2 straight months. Well, now he's down at Tyndall 3 weeks ago, and Scar, you'll appreciate this, as the FTU IP. You're taking a new student out to, hey, you're going to fight a fourth gen fighter. You're going to own him. And I'll just say that Motor kind of handed him their ass. It was pretty awesome.
Scar,
Yes.
Scar,
Yes.
Scar, is the Raptor community still really sensitive about getting a HUD footage with a pipper on the platform? That used to be like thou shalt not ever record a Raptor in your HUD. That was a sacrilege. I think it's happened enough though that we can say it happens.
I've never seen it, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Lies. They're all lies. Oh, hey Vader, what do you have? I know. What do you got? You've done enough red flags. You got to have some buffoonerous stories.
Oh, I have plenty of them. So we don't have enough time for all of them, but I'll cut to the good ones. Speaking of one, so my whopping 6.9 hours in the C model. I've only flown the V0, so I have flown the worst, oldest, most beat up mech scan radar the Eagle has, and it's the best radar I've ever flown with. So I was so impressed. I was like, holy cow, check me out. So, so in the F-16, I flew a lot of Red Air, as we talked about pretty much this whole podcast on how, kind of just some background. What it normally was in my experience was like feast or famine. When you're going through an upgrade, you're in mission qual training, flight lead upgrade, or an IPUG, or an instructor pilot upgrade, you fly only Blue Air. So that means the rest of your bros fly Red Air. So the moment I finished the flight lead upgrade, I just did like 4.5 months of straight Red Air. And luckily I was leading Red Air. So one night in Japan, I was in Misawa, which is northern Japan. We're over west of Japan. And at night, flying Red Air. We're doing a night DCA, because why wouldn't you, over the ocean with no way to tell between the stars and the squid boats on the water.
Because the bad guys are going to try to fight you in this exact same. They're like, I'm not going out there at night.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, these guys are nuts.
Right. That's your deterrence right there. See, that's your deterrence.
Yeah. So I'm Red Air, and I'm cooking along there, and I lock up one of my buddies, and we're on a single freak war. So it's a non-RTO or non-range training officer. And he locks me up. And in the F-16, because there is a flight control system called the FLICUS, you make inputs into just a stick force sensor that says, hey, I want all the jet can give me. And the jet will limit depending on if you're in category 1 or category 3. So think air-to-air kind of maneuverability, BFM, and Cat 3 is like dropping bombs, doing stuff like that. So my buddy's like, oh, I should be in Cat 3, but I'm going to fly in Cat 1 because who wants to be in the non-maneuverable F-16 setting? So he's up in the high 30s, maybe 40s, and I'm up there as well. And I shoot him, he shoots me, and he goes to leave and goes out of control. So at night, over the ocean, just flipping through the air, and so he calls, like, hey, I shot you like Fox 3, so-and-so. And then I see him start to move because I'm locked to him. And then out of nowhere, my radar just freaks out. And like just everything starts spinning on my radar. I'm like, what is going on? And I just hear him key the mic and he goes, oh, I'm out of control. And he gets jet back under control and he recovers and flows cold. And the moment he gets jet back under control, he's like, timeout, bullseye. And I was like, strong. I respect that. No knock it off, no nothing. He's just out of control, back in control, calls a timeout. And, that's how I was like,
strong.
Legend. You should get a replot for that. Just for the listeners who don't know, knock it off and timeout may sound the same. They're not the same thing.
Not at all.
So timeout means the missile has timed out, and you're basically calling your shot. So someone is either alive or dead. Where a knock it off is actually like a training timeout. Like, okay, everyone stop fighting. Let something bad happen or is about to happen. So that's great.
Good night.
Scar, let's hear from you. What do you got?
The best Red Air stories are the ones where you are being the buffoon, right? And so classic, nighttime Red Air young guy story. At Raptors, oftentimes we find ourselves up high. So I think I've got, in for those, who may not know, for safety flight, we actually break up the airspace into safety blocks where, as an example, the 0s to 4, so 10 to 14, 20 to 24, 30 to 34 are blue airspace. And then the 5s to 9s, so 15, 19, 25, 29, etc., are for Red Air. So, of course, I'm stuck in the bozosphere 45 to 49 because why not? And so I'm out looking like through my NVGs. I shouldn't have them on, but I'm being a jerk Red Air. And so I'm trying to find some lights. And then suddenly the jet starts shaking. What's going on? I realize I'm at like 0.3 Mach up at 46,000 feet. So I push, surely the Raptor, I'll put it up into mill, climb out of this thing, no problem. Nope, that's not going to happen. So then I push both engines over the hump to AB, get a deedle, which is like, hey, idiot, look over here at your integrated cautions and warnings. And it's like left and right, AB, no light. And so now both my afterburners aren't working. I'm at like below stall speed, falling like a leaf through every single block. And then, people are calling shots on me with this guy, the Kobayashi Maru. Nobody's ever seen this before. Yep, this is not intentional. And so they're like, hey, Raptor 4, you're dead. You like get the heck out of this area. I'm like, yeah, I know. Trying to fall like a leaf out there. End up, losing 20,000 feet. Young guy, climb back up. Wipe the sweat from my brow and go home. But thankfully, no safety of flight problems. But keep track of your airspeed and airspace, boys and girls, is critically important.
Nice. Stinger, off to you now. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I can't really top many of those, but since our squadron, I feel like, does every red flag that there ever is, we have a few. So they changed recently. They changed the red flag vol time, or the vulnerability period, basically for an hour and a half. So the whole mission, lasts an hour and a half, where you rally the forces and reenact Desert Storm, and then invade, and standard plan of seed, and you're gonna do an air sweep, and then you're gonna do seed, and then you're gonna do these strikes, and then you're gonna do some PR event. And you're gonna come home, and same thing every time, right? So we're going through the planning, and it was evident, that from the Blue Air side of the house that it was not going to go very well at all. The air-to-air plan had basically we had F-35. There was a couple F-35s as Red Air, and everybody was scared of what they were going to do and what that meant for Blue Air. And we had a host of the standard F-16s, as well as we had a few of our own F-15s. as Red Air as well. The air-to-air plan had something like the Raptors were not going to be able to make the tanker, and they were going to bingo out kind of fast, and then everybody was going to be, it was going to be a big free-for-all and everything, and it played out exactly like that. And they made the scenario in a way that there was an ROE line, and basically if you trip that, then the enemy was fights on, and they could start blasting people out of the sky. But if you didn't trip the ROE line, then the war would never start. So they tripped it, initially just like pushed in, and Raptors pushed across the board, and everything starts, and then within 10 minutes our Hava got shot down, and Jack died, and and then at vol plus 30, I think all blue forces were cold, and red had air superiority, and it was this huge mess. We go to the DFP, and mission commander says, well, yeah, I think it was the DFP is the comm link between C2 and the finding the scuds, or something completely irrelevant, and anyway, so the next time, there was a Marine F-35 guy, or there was a Navy F-35C guy that was going to be the mission commander next. He said, you know what, I got this. And so I was flying Red Air at that time, and in his planning, what he said was, you know what, I'm just going to marshal forever, and I'm going to wait until there's 20 minutes left in the vault, and I'm going to throw everybody across and overwhelm them. And then the vault's going to be over, and we're going to come back as heroes. So I get up in the Red Air cap, and the MiG-1 has this big plan about how, they're going to trip this, and we're going to launch this and shoot this. And, we were shooting some pretty long-range, missiles that were going to reach back and touch them. And they never tripped the line. And I bingoed out before they tripped the line.
Training ever.
And we were really pissed off. And then they all rolled Red Air. And they came back, and the red flag commander got up there. And later on, I said, guys, this isn't what we want. We didn't really intend for this, and we don't want you to game the system and this and that. And he's like, well, I only had X amount of fighters. I wasn't gonna throw all of them, at the beginning and then not be able to cover the ball and this stuff. So I just, so as Red Air, it was just interesting watching everybody marshal, and that's all we did. It was almost like DCA caps in Syria or somewhere else where you just watch people, real DCA, you just watch people. You're a voyeur to the war, and then you just, go back and you land. So
turns out in real life, the Raider doesn't know what vol time is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that guy's like, hey, are we gonna meet at high noon over at this point or what? No, I'm gonna kill you when it's tomorrow. Oh, that's funny. So I think it's time to quit where we're headed. That was a great episode. Thanks for the conversation, guys. I really appreciate it, and thanks for listening. By the way, if you like the show, join the 5 or 6 people who've spent the 2 seconds to go give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. The ratio of people who click the button and the people who listen is astronomical. So please spend 2 seconds, go hit the button. It'd be great. Give us a 5-star rating. Oh, by the way, this is our episode 2. So now you can unlock that next level on Spotify, which allows you to leave a rating. So do that too, please. So that's it. That's the show. Go tell your friends. Follow us on the socials. Do what you got to do. This has been The Merge. See ya.